Hello, everybody. Welcome to Every Store Tells a Story, the psychology of retail from window display to checkout and beyond. I'm Simon Eskow with Sin7's marketing department. We'll hear from Bronny Jacobsen in a moment and later from Caitlin Bennett of Afterpay. But first, some housekeeping. At the end of this webinar, Bronny will have a few minutes for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please submit them to us in writing using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce Bronny Jacobsen. Bronny has more than 20 years experience developing merchandise for some of the most recognizable fashion retailers in Australia and New Zealand, including Pumpkin Patch and Rivers. Her insight is always sharp. Please welcome Bronny, and Bronny, take it away.
Thanks, Simon. Well, before we get started on the story of your store, I thought we needed to set the scene. Not very long ago, retail was king. Retailers essentially had a captive audience, drawn from people physically located around the vicinity of their stores. The rise of malls and discount department stores meant availability of product exponentially soared and prices dropped, oftentimes along with the quality, you could argue. But everyone with even a little bit of discretionary income could walk away with a wee treat to brighten up the afternoon, and then they'd be ready to do it all again a day or a week later. We became a species of consumers, seemingly insatiable, waiting for the next season, sale, or trending object, never mind that it was already on its conveyor belt to insignificance. Closet organizer businesses and storage unit companies boomed, facilitating our habit and distracting us from our compulsive accumulation. It's a generalization for sure, but you get the picture. For retailers, sales were relatively easy to come by because customers didn't need a lot of persuasion. You could basically advertise and know someone would turn up. People just wanted stuff. But things have definitely shifted, and retailers certainly don't find themselves in this comfortable position any longer. The incoming tide for bricks and mortar has turned significantly and comprehensively. Not only is there the tsunami of online e-commerce where everything's getting quicker and easier, but there's also a new way of viewing the world. Growth of e-commerce sales continue to play a significant role in the transformation of retail for sure. Businesses actually have taken to camouflaging the actual percentage that those sales represent, instead choosing to wrap them up into comparative sales because their bricks and mortar sales are simultaneously tanking quite drastically. Interestingly, Nordstrom recently bucked this trend and came right out and reported that their e-commerce sales now represent 33% of their total, which is absolutely staggering. Others are happy to acknowledge exponential growth in their online sales, but when it sits within an overall decline, the bricks and mortar story then says it all. So e-commerce has certainly shaped a new way of thinking and a new generation with new expectations. Customers now have the world at their fingertips. It's same day, customizable, and available at any price. They're used to and they expect things to be frictionless and instant. Impatience is the norm, and if the experience doesn't live up to their expectations, they don't hang around. Attention span and tolerance is shorter than at any other time in history. So, because physical shopping is no longer the only option, going shopping then is increasingly not about buying. It's about comparing, experiencing, connecting, gathering information, and maybe purchasing. This makes a tangible difference to what needs to happen in our stores. But e-commerce is not the only factor that's changing the landscape. There's actually a mindset shift, a dissatisfaction with stuff, a collective concern for our impact on the planet, the resurgence of individualization of art, and a focus on longevity. The rise of Marie Kondo and the popularity of tiny houses illustrate this very well. And then, of course, there's the growing movement around sharing rather than owning. You've got Ubers, WeWork spaces, and even renting clothing from the likes of Urban Outfitters, Free People, and Anthropology, which are, of course, traditional retail stores. This new wave of shoppers increasingly want to deal with businesses where there is an alignment of values with their own, where there is more at stake than just cold, hard transaction. Of course, some retailers and customers will continue to operate as they had over decades. There'll be die-hard customers who continue to shun online shopping, but putting your head in the sand and thinking this is a fad and not choosing to engage in a different way, I would assert is a very risky position to take. It's worth noting that by 2025, 75% of the global working population, therefore consumers, will be millennials, so they will largely be immersed in this mindset. Change then is irrefutable. The facts, statistics, and retail casualties clearly show the shift in the market environment. Traditional retail success stories are closing or struggling, and sales generally are no longer buoyant. So, the challenge is what can be done to ride the new wave rather than being bowled over by it. People still need to purchase and they still like shopping as an activity. It's just happening in a different way. This conversation then is centered around bricks and mortar specifically, but much of the commentary is also translatable to the online platform as well. The bottom line is, though, everything about your store tells a customer or a potential customer something about your brand. It either draws them closer to a purchase or pushes them further away. So it's never been more vital that every element of what they experience tells the right story. So, relevance. That right story only comes from having a thorough understanding of who our customers are. They're the ones we're creating product for. Do we actually know what they need? Do we know what they want? Do we know how much they can afford to pay? Do we know how often they come into our store? You can get a lot of this data from analyzing metrics, which is of course essential, but metrics on their own don't give us a complete enough view or a real depth of understanding. Just like any other relationship, we need to actually get involved, to communicate, and to do it regularly. Nothing beats face to face. We actually need to leave the comfort of our offices, set aside our assumptions, ask questions, and listen to the answers. What is it they value and believe in? What do they aspire to? Where else do they shop? Or where would they like to shop if they could? How confident or positive do they feel given what's happening in their world and in their lives? What we might hear back might feel less tangible, but ultimately it needs to be increasingly influential in the long run. It's remarkable how many stores lose their way because they take their customers for granted and don't actively seek out conversations to confirm that they're still on the right track. The more we understand, the better we can genuinely serve the right product in the right way. And when we do get it right, the customer in turn feels a natural alignment. They feel known, they feel at home in our environment, and of course, they're therefore more likely to visit our store again. In years gone by, it wasn't nearly as imperative that businesses were so diligent or personal. In fact, this kind of commentary might have been seen as unnecessary and a waste of resource. But that was before anyone could shop from anywhere in the world from the comfort of their lounge. The rules of engagement have changed. Your brand's story matters more than it ever has, and your customer's story needs to matter to you. So for the rest of this conversation, we'll make the assumption that the brand has got its finger on the pulse of its people. And then layered on top of that, there's a challenge to make everything we do excellent. Average is easy, but average ultimately means invisible. We have to stand out. So, first impressions. The theory goes you can tell a lot about a person based on their shoes. That may or may not be true depending on the person or maybe depending on the shoes, but when it comes to stores, there's no question. First impressions do count. You get a very fast 2.5-second opportunity to catch someone's attention with your window, and a lot can be conveyed in that tiny moment in time. So it goes without saying that store windows need to be compelling. You'll know yourself how easy it is to walk on by if nothing catches your eye. Windows need to be compelling not only to your known and understood customer, but they should also intrigue others on the fringes of your demographic as well. They should make someone curious enough, excited enough, or simply interested enough to come in. Or if they don't have enough time, they should be memorable enough to make them want to come back later. If the window is none of those things, don't be under any illusion. It's still told a story 100%. Unfortunately, that story is that your brand is so uninspiring, so irrelevant, or so boring that you've saved them the effort of coming in the door. Store windows are never neutral. They either do a great job or they do a terrible one. So what does it take to create a good one? First, you have to have decided what the purpose of the window is each time you change it out. Are you showcasing product, the brand, or are you shouting a promotional message? You need to be clear. Typically, windows should be about newness and interest unless you're in sale mode. So think about the layers in the window. There's a backdrop and a foreground, and then the middle layer. Use all of them for depth and for interest. Your focal point, however, should always be the main event in the middle layer, and that focal point should always be at eye level when you look at it from the exterior of the store. Decals on the glass and signage behind the focal point are ideal options for layering. Decals frame and talk to the focus, while signage behind sets a backdrop, which is also useful and distracting from the workings of the store inside. Colour, of course, is always key. Definitely use it to create attention. It doesn't always have to be loud. It can be subtle or tonal or just an interesting combo. Just make sure you're intentional and impactful with it. If you want to use props, which can be great eye catchers, make sure they ultimately don't distract the customer from the main message. You're not selling the prop, remember. Movement can also work if it makes sense and it fits the budget. In a window, more is generally not more. Clutter just ends up looking cheap, and if there's too much going on, nothing stands out. And don't be boring. If there's a seasonal event happening, think outside the square. Really, no one needs another holly and berry Christmas window decal. The idea is to stand out, not blend in. Front windows need to be changed out regularly. Most have done their job after 2 weeks and should be refreshed. And this is not just about aesthetics. Front windows, they say, play a part in up to 24% of all purchases. So you're crazy not to keep them fresh and current. You have to factor in specific store workload time to do this so you don't miss out on potential. The other thing, of course, is to remember that depending on the location, windows are visible 24/7. They're telling our story even when the doors are shut. They can be silent sales people if you add a QR code on the window or your website details at least. Never miss an opportunity. Serve this instant generation and don't miss the sales. Decompression area. The first thing that should happen when we get inside a store is that we should walk into a little bit of uncluttered space. This is a decompression area that prompts a subliminal release of pressure from the hustle and bustle of the mall or the street outside. This is where we get a minute to pause and reset our focus. It doesn't actually have to be a huge space, but it's an area where the customer isn't closed in immediately or assailed with product and signage. There's a little second of peace. Then they get to look around and decide where to move to next. Most people aren't even consciously aware of a space like this in a store, but a good retailer will be intentional about creating it because it genuinely sets the customer up for a better experience. Visibility through the store from the decompression area is key. Store fixtures closest then should be low enough to see beyond, especially to priority fixtures or walls. The decompression area is also a great space to pop a table into. Not too close to the entrance, however, or you'll just create a subliminal barrier to entry. Just far enough into the space so that it can act as a natural divider and creates a path on either side, essentially helping to direct customers into the store. Store layouts. So once we're inside, what's the best store layout? Well, different layouts are relevant for different products and different types of stores, but there are a few common ones. Aisles and rows, obviously ideal for lots of similar sized or shaped product that don't require too much visual merchandising. So obviously groceries and books are candidates. They're perfect also for really high density of stock. When you've got an aisle or a row, it helps if you slightly angle them so that the customer's line of sight can extend beyond what's immediately in front of them. And again, you'll hear me say it quite a few times through this, visibility through the store is always key. The ends of aisles and rows are prime real estate as well because of their added visibility, and they're often used for promotional product or key drivers. You'll see that in supermarkets, but you'll see it in big box retailers as well, very commonly. Then there's the loop or the racetrack, which is often used again in big box retailers or discount department stores, but it's also seen in smaller stores too. That's where products placed in the center of a loop as well as around the walls. If the width of the racetrack itself is wide enough, it can be the ideal place for featured or promotional product because it's a natural walkway. Again, this is really highly historically contested space and very profitable. The beauty of the loop is the visibility and the accessibility of products or categories. You can walk easily through the store without being overwhelmed by just an ongoing forest of product with no relief. In discount department stores too, where categories can often be the size of large standalone stores on their own, a loop effectively minimises the need to move through one category to get to another. It also facilitates natural practical adjacencies of aligned product, for example, activewear and sports equipment, and can be placed both inside and outside of the loop. And then, of course, there's the free-flowing layout, which is what a lot of small and medium-sized stores opt for, especially if their products across a variety of categories or shapes. It's versatile and aesthetically interesting. In this scenario, it's ideal if fixtures are movable and of varying heights so they can be adapted easily. That encourages an enjoyable browsing experience. Visibility and piquing interest through the store is the goal. So this is a great layout to create enticing glimpses that draw the customer through. But whatever layout you choose, it must facilitate comfortable movement around the entirety of the store. Pushchairs and wheelchairs need to be easily accommodated, and there should be enough space for people to pass each other without the dreaded butt brush. Personal space in a store is absolutely vital. Stock levels. Not only should the layout suit your product, it also needs to facilitate having the right amount of stock on the floor so that you can hit your budgeted sales targets. There's absolutely no point having a store looking beautiful but missing sales because stock is selling quicker than it's being replenished, or having your shelves so empty that it looks like you're going out of business. Too much stock can be just as negative. Jammed prongs or shelves that make items hard to pull out is not only frustrating for the customer, the store inevitably ends up in a mess as well. All of that ends up devaluing your product, making it feel mass-produced and cheap. Whatever concentration of stock you need, make sure your store fixtures are appropriate to the levels required. So, let's assume the store window is spectacular. There's a decompression space and the layout suits the product, the stock levels, and the customer. What next? Well, the basic rules. Once we're in the door of a store, there's some basic sensory rules that are pretty important. Lighting. Your lighting needs to enhance the product. I guess it goes without saying. Too dark might feel pretty cool and edgy in the store itself, think Abercrombie and Fitch. But if you can't read the swing ticket or see the colour properly, you will absolutely miss sales and frustrate customers. Alternatively, too bright and it can feel a bit invasive and uncomfortable, not warm and definitely not classy. If you're selling apparel, soft goods, or makeup, the customer actually needs to see what they'll look like in natural light. So make sure whatever you put in place achieves that for them. Get that balance right. Temperature. In the same vein, get your temperature right. Too hot or too cold is just inhospitable. You want to welcome people in and have them want to stay in your store, just like you would in your home. Apart from that, it's the right thing to do for your staff as well. They need to be comfortable. If one of the values of your business is about clean green energy, make sure your lighting and heating solutions line up with that as well. Your story has to be integral and run through everything you're doing. Don't scrimp on lighting or on temperature. Smell. You know how great it is to walk into a store that smells fantastic, or how overpowering other stores can be. It's a fine line. If you end up choosing a fragrance, match it to the character of your brand, fresh or casual or sultry or whatever. You'll know you've hit the nail on the head when people want that same fragrance for their home. If anyone's ever been to the Langham Hotel in Hong Kong, it's a great example. As you walk in, you just know where you are. If you don't want to use a fragrance per se, keep something on hand to freshen the air in the event that your store gets invaded by something unpleasant. And it does happen. But an unpleasant odour can clear a store in minutes. Clean and tidy. Goes without saying that a store should be clean and tidy as possible, but it's incredible how many stores don't do this. No one wants to buy anything from a grubby store. If you don't care enough to keep it clean, you don't respect your customer enough. Not only that, if people can visibly see dirtiness, they imagine it to be worse than it actually is. Keep the untidiness under control too, and keep on top of any folding or resorting. You have to factor that into your store workload as well. People will simply walk away if finding what they want seems too hard or too overwhelming. Store changing rooms and facilities also obviously have to be pleasant to be in too. Don't turn people off by cluttering up those spaces with boxes or hangers or product needing to be returned to the shop floor. Dust balls in the corners just show no one cares enough. Toilets need to be clean and fresh too. Every impression, everything that they see tells your customer a story about what your brand values, and it also tells them how important they are in your operation. And staff. Your staff are your absolute most important asset. A great customer experience stands or falls by how a person is treated and how they feel at all times in your store. And a great customer experience only comes from happy, engaged staff. Too many retail businesses deeply damage their brand by neglecting their store teams, who in turn become uninspired, disengaged, and end up just not treating customers particularly well. And then those customers in turn decide that they really don't want to shop with you again. Your store teams are your front line, and they're the human face of everything the brand stands for. They should know and they should have a passion for the values of the business. To have great staff at any level, they should know that they are listened to, respected, and valued. Store staff need to feel connected to head office, even though they're in a different location and performing a different function. Their physical tasks in the store need to be achievable, not overwhelming, and they should always operate with the customer taking precedence. As much as possible, your staff should be empowered to solve problems themselves and use their initiative in the moment. Not only is this customer focused and dynamic, it also cultivates an environment of trust. And none of this happens by accident. Interaction and relationship with head office teams has to be cultivated, regular, and authentic, and much more than just the numbers. When your store teams are deeply connected, they will be your most valuable asset. They'll know and love the product, the brand, and the values. They'll be engaged and they'll be your greatest ambassadors. So, those are the basics. How do we move people through the store? Obviously, it stands to reason that the most compelling product should be positioned as close to the front of store as possible. When we enter a store, there's actually a slight preference for all of us to look to the left and then move to the right. Front doors are often positioned to optimize this too. So then, the front right of a store is prime real estate, followed very closely by the front left. Many stores also have a central display just past their decompression zone, with surrounding fixtures showcasing their latest product or best deal. Pyramid configurations are common and work really well. Uneven numbers are great, whether they're mannequins or displays of tins or whatever it may be, but that pyramid shape often leads the viewer in. Most retailers split their stores into virtual areas by priority. They then gradually work product from the front of the store when it's new and fresh to the back of the store as it ages. The exception to that would be if your focus of the week is a major promotional deal or the start of a sale. Then you may decide to put that sale stock in your priority space for a specific time. But just don't leave it there too long. People get tired of old sale stock pretty quickly. Just like your front window, regular remerchandising of priority spaces is essential to keep the freshness and newness and interest levels up. Newness always encourages people in. Then we've got the eye line, skyline, and thigh line. Well, the eye line is the most powerful line of sight. It's what your customer sees by default. Your most desirable product and your promotional messaging needs to be at that level, visible and clear. You need to make it easy for customers to find what you want them to find. Desirable product at this level throughout the store will continue to draw the customer through. The skyline, though, is also important. That's the space between the top of your fixtures and the ceiling. It's really valuable space, especially if you have a high ceiling. Left bare, it can look cheap and uninviting unless it's an architectural statement in itself. So it's a great place for navigational signage. In a large store, there is nothing more frustrating than not knowing where to go to get what you want. If not that, it can also be ideal for lifestyle or branding, marketing, setting a scene, bringing warmth, showing your product on people or being used by people. And occasionally it might be useful for promotional or sale signage if you have a really big store-wide event on. And then there's the thigh line. This is the level that people don't naturally look down to unless you give them a reason to. Products situated at that level will always be harder to sell. The challenge is to interrupt the customer's natural eyeline focus by creating breakpoints or interest that captures their attention. So what do I mean by a breakpoint? Every layout needs a breakpoints. They're especially important if you have long lengths of wall or aisles, but they're vital. These are interesting visual interruptions that slow down the walkthrough. They create an opportunity for people to stop and pause where you want them to, rather than just quickly moving along. They could be a different merchandising feature, like a small product table situated within the flow of a wall. It could be a printed marketing visual, those sorts of things create a breathing space, potentially giving more information or talking about features and benefits. They could even be a prop or maybe just a simple change of background. Sometimes they're intriguing and they create a wee bit of mystery, but they just change it up a bit and create a break. Even a change from a side hung product to a front facing product changes things up and inevitably enhances sales. Breakpoints are PowerPoints, little resets as someone walks throughout the store. Adjacencies. To get easy movement through your store, it's important to understand natural product adjacencies and also natural category adjacencies. If you've got good analytics, you'll be able to see typically what products are purchased together. But it can often be a real challenge to wrestle with the best positioning. Our objective needs to be to make it easy for our customer to add to their basket size by having related product close at hand, a towel with their bathers or batteries with their toys or a top with their shorts. We also don't want to dissuade people from getting to where they'd like to go by poor adjacencies. Women's lingerie, for example, is not ideal located next to menswear. And then there are things like makeup counters, which need good light, but also need to be private enough to allow your customers to relax. And of course, changing rooms. The location of changing rooms needs to allow for privacy and comfort. And of course, a changing room towards the back of the store is great because the customer gets to see the whole store on the way through. Moving on to visual merchandising. Well, this is a whole science on its own. Visual merchandising is designed to maximize sales and margin and is way more impactful than many people recognize. Symmetry, balance, rhythm, and repetition all play a part in the ideal VM layout, while color, texture, proportion, and shape also creates a message. Visual merchandising should always be based on analytics and customer behavior, which then guides the product placement and the arrangement. This is just not about making things look pretty. It's important to understand how your specific customer likes to shop. That will determine whether you merchandise by category, by end use, by story, by product type, by seasonality. Visual merchandising is your subliminal salesperson. It attracts, it guides, it educates, and it can make sales all on its own throughout the store. Visual merchandising should enhance, not distract, and it actually needs to be simple for your teams to execute. Props, again, can be great as long as they're there for support, but not the focus. Truly effective visual merchandising relies on constantly evaluating its effectiveness. As I said, it's about maximizing sales, not just having a great looking store. It's worthy of a whole session just on its own. Sales and clearance. Depending on the type of store you have, at certain times of the year, sale or clearance product becomes the focus. And sometimes, as I said before, it's right to have that heavily promoted product at the front of the store. Post-Christmas and New Year are examples of obvious times when the customer mindset is after a bargain. People often shop quite differently at these times. They're more impulse-driven and they have more limited budgets. They're less concerned about the aesthetics than the deal that's being offered. So at this point, your visual merchandising and your marketing can reflect this. Just don't let sale or clearance hang around at the front of your store too long, though. There's a definite lifespan after which you must get it to a designated space and out of your priority areas. Yes, clearance can still be profitable, but newness is where the better margins come in. Outside of sale time, it's ideal to have a dedicated space for the natural bargain hunters within your customer base, and there's always some of those. Make it easy for them to know where to go in the store all the time to find their bargain. Promotional clarity. This is just a slight aside, but make sure you know what promotional activity resonates with your customer and make it easy for for them to work out how much they need to pay. Percentages off and bundle deals are sometimes a challenge to work out. The location of signage, any signage, needs to make it obvious which product is involved so you don't frustrate the customer. And on another note, if the customer does get a happy surprise at the till, meaning even more of a bargain than they thought they were getting, you've failed. Your deal wasn't clear enough. Maybe they would have bought more, and clearly they would have happily bought it at a higher price. A promotion only works if the unit sales outstrip the loss in margin. Make sure your promotional signage is clear, simple, and accurate. And if you're going to use words like limited or end soon, tell the truth. Customers need to trust what you say. And finally, checking out. Checkouts ideally should be on the left-hand side of the store and not too close to the front. If they are too close, it actually can feel like a barrier to entry of the store itself, a natural go no further sign. You can have a little candy lane of small add-on items that work in the lead up and the lead through to the checkout itself. That sort of lane keeps people interested if they have to wait, and it's a great opportunity for an impulse sale or a small promotional deal. So, quickly to sum up, many of these principles translate over to e-commerce as well, of course. The homepage is the equivalent of the store window. The menu and product placement on the pages is the equivalent of walking through a store. And your VM is just as important on your website as it is in your store. But a store is always an opportunity for connection, whether it's in supplying the answer to a need, whether it's sparking fun and excitement of a treat, or piquing interest in design or innovation. Our store teams are our ambassadors. Our product is how we serve our customers, and our brand needs to represent the values we and our customers believe in. Our job in retail is to surprise and delight the customer because they know we understand them so well. We should exceed their expectations and leave them wanting to come back again.
Thank you, Bronny. That was really great. As a reminder to our audience, Bronny will have some time to answer a few questions at the end of this webinar. So please send your questions in writing with the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Next up, I'm very happy to welcome Caitlin Bennett of Afterpay, who is going to speak with us, who's going to talk about the role that staff play in sealing a lasting customer relationship at the point of sale. Welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you, and wow, what fantastic insight so far. Like you've been told, my name's Caitlin. I'm the Afterpay ambassador and in-store trainer. It's lovely to be chatting to you all today, and thanks Sin7 for inviting me to speak. So I've worked in-store retail for over 10 years now, predominantly fashion retail. I've worked in roles from visual merchandising through to management. I then went on to become a designer and buyer for many years. And about 1.5 years ago, I started my own fashion business, where I quickly discovered the power of Afterpay as another great option to offer customers as a part of a fantastic customer experience. Having Afterpay integrated with Sin7 is amongst the most seamless, quick and easy ways to transact with Afterpay in store. So again, you are able to offer your customers a fantastic transaction experience. I think it's really important to be aware that the point of purchase is a vital part of the overall customer experience, certainly not one to be overlooked. I spend much of my time now training and working collaboratively with leading retailers across Australia and New Zealand on how to offer an exceptional in-store experience, focusing on 1, greeting your customer and developing the relationship. 2, discovering, suggesting and presenting to your customer. 3, handling customer objections. 4, closing the sale and offering extras to your customer. 5, point of purchase. Now let's look at this step in more detail and chat through some elements to consider at each point of purchase in store. Thanking your customer. Never forget to simply thank your customer for choosing to purchase with you today in your store. It's a great way to show gratitude and that it's not just another sale to you. Affirming the purchase. It's always nice to affirm your customer's choice. You might say something like, You've chosen well. I think you'll definitely get the most wear out of this piece, or whatever you genuinely believe to be true. It's a great feeling to know you've made the right choice when purchasing. Affirming the relationship. If you've built up that rapport, it might be suitable to say something like, "It was lovely to meet you," just like you would if you met someone outside the store. Inviting your customer back. Let's say the customer has purchased something for an event. You might say, "Pop back in soon and let me know how it goes." Or if they're purchasing an everyday item, you could invite them back simply by saying, "Hope to see you again soon." Making your customer feel welcome back into your store is a great way to build that lasting customer relationship. Finally, saying farewell to your customer. Warm and genuine farewells are just as important as warm greetings. You don't want to switch off once you've closed the sale, of course. The aim is to build a genuine relationship. And I find enjoying the process and even making friendships with customers along the way to be a great approach. Telling the customer your name at the start of their sales journey is a great way to build that relationship, and knowing theirs also. So reminding them of your name at the end of the sales journey can, again, help the customer to make a real connection with you and with your store. And remember, of course, to smile and enjoy the process. So I hope by diving a little deeper into the sales journey and the point of sale, it empowers you guys to all deliver the best retail experience possible for your customers. It's something I'm really passionate about and really believe in the power it can have to transform your business for the better. Thank you.
Great, Caitlin. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate and really appreciate Afterpay's involvement in this webinar. We do have a question, and I think this is something that I was thinking about while Bronny was talking about what big retailers do in their stores. And so, what about boutique stores? So the question that we have is, we want to know more about spaces related to small boutiques rather than the bigger stores, specifically destination shopping. What is important there visually?
Well, I think actually the principles are essentially the same. But I do think that in a small store, every small space is even more valuable because you've got a smaller size to work with. So you want to make everything you do count. But the principles are the same in the sense of you want a customer to come in and have great visibility. You want to move them from one place to the next by showing them with color or intrigue or breakpoints. You want to move them around. As I said, some of the layouts, particularly the loop layout or the free-flowing layout, they work equally well in a large store or a small store. I think that really it is about the tempting through the whole space. Essentially a lot of those principles stack up whether it's a big or a small store.
We do hear a lot, or I've heard a lot over the last few years, read a lot about different kinds of, I would say, fads that are going through retail of all kinds. So we have virtual reality and augmented reality. That's one fad. We have stores that also offer classes and courses related to the products that they're selling. There's a brand that also sells that sells bedding and has a hotel somewhere in Los Angeles. And so I think going back to what you're saying, that these same principles about moving people through, letting them see the products that they're looking for, communicating with them clearly, are probably more universal for all size stores, and probably more lasting than these kind of transitional things that we're seeing. But I do have a question. This is from me. Are any of these kind of gimmicky things going to eventually become part of the retail experience, in your opinion?
Wow, well, a hard question. I'm sure some of them will. No question. I think the nature of retail is becoming very experiential, and so I think we will absolutely see some of that stuff becoming part and parcel of various brands and various product types for sure. Yeah, no question about it.
Okay, that was a bit of an unfair curveball, but I have something very specific for you. Can you address the same thing about, there's a question about, do you have any suggestions for bathroom homeware retailing? I guess, how would you apply all those concepts about eyeline, skyline, thigh line to things like bathroom homeware?
Well, again, same principles, right? You know, your eyeline is your eyeline. So even within, it doesn't matter what the product type is, you have got every customer, there is an eyeline. And so the principle of the eyeline is you get your most desirable product visible at that level within the store. You definitely want to do that. That is where most of your sales will come from. Um, depending, it's in some ways it's quite tricky to answer specifically because store types are so different. You know, you can get a small 80 square meter store, whether it's bathroom or whether it's apparel or whatever, and it's little. The principles remain the same though. It's this thing of how do you move them from the front to the back so that they see your whole store. I'm not sure if that's really answering the question. Let me just see. I think within bathroom, though, you've got the opportunity for colour. And I think that can be a real magnet throughout the store. So you need to work out what your visual merchandising is in terms of that, because that can be really compelling in an otherwise quite potentially utilitarian type of store. But colour can do a lot. And if it's not colour in the product, then do something with your walls that then lures people in further. So it doesn't actually have to be the product if the product itself is quite neutral. But you can do things with your flooring, you can do things with your walls, you can do things with your marketing, with your branding, which show people using your product, and all of that enhances what your brand's all about, and shows people using your product. So it gives a real human face to it. So I think those sorts of things are the types of things I would be thinking about.
And I imagine lighting is also critical for these kind of products, as well as this is just from the hip, contextual merchandising of the product. So an actual kind of bathroom layout might work in that situation, but I'm just kind of throwing that out there. I don't know.
And I think depending on, again, the size of the store and the finance available, you know, that has a real, that plays a real part in what can be done in terms of visual merchandising within a store or not. But I think even if you haven't got, you can't, you know, set up a mock bathroom in your store, you can still do things that create a compelling and interesting experience for your customers as they come through. I guess the litmus test has to be, if you walked into your own store, do you think it's amazing, or do you think it's just pretty ho-hum? And if we think it's just sort of pretty average and ho-hum, then that's what it is. And in a weird way too, there's nothing stopping anyone from giving something, you know, trying something that's a bit new and setting yourself apart. And I think almost as you're saying, will some of the new directions in retail take off? Yes, they will, but there will also be newness in the way we merchandise and the way we present our stores as well. Again, I think some of the principles will remain the same, obviously, but definitely new innovations happening.
Cool. I think that pretty much brings us to the end. I don't think we have any more questions from the audience. So I want to once again thank Caitlin Bennett from Afterpay for her participation. And I want to say thank you to Bronny Jacobsen for her, well, let's say her, well, for talking through your sore throat. Really appreciate your time. From
Pleasure.
Sin7, thank you all for attending our webinar. Take care.